Write what you know. Probably the most common piece of advice that any author will hear. Yet, the truth is that the vast majority of books are not about what the author knows. In terms of the debate around diversity, write what you know is increasingly being equated with the slippery notion of authenticity. Write what you know is being taken to mean that an author should write only about matters of which they have personal experience. Of course, this can be highly productive. Many writers do find it easier to draw upon their own lived experiences. In this video, we will examine the implications of writing what you know. Authenticity in the publishing industry is now generally taken to mean the validity of a literary voice with respect to the author of that voice. In other words, the question being asked is this: does this author have the right to write about this particular topic? The trouble is, who decides whether a particular writer is authentic enough to write about a given topic? Let me illustrate this by means of some famous examples where I think the nature of the debate becomes fuzzy. One of my favorite authors is Kazuo Ishiguro. Ishiguro was born in Japan, but moved to the UK aged 5. He did not return to Japan for 30 years. Yet his first 2 novels were set in Japan. However, his most famous work, The Remains of the Day, possibly the most English novel I have ever read, is set in England with a cast of very white, very English characters. Ishiguro is a recipient of the Nobel Prize for Literature. The fact that he has written both English and Japanese set works without being vilified for cultural misappropriation speaks volumes. On one level, it indicates that as long as someone has lived in a particular country or can claim a particular heritage, it should entitle them to write about that culture. But just how long do you have to live somewhere to earn that entitlement? How much of your heritage must be of that culture, and how recent must it be? Let me give you another example, my own. I spent 23 years and 7 novels trying to get a publishing deal. All of these books were written completely from my imagination. Getting rather sick of collecting rejection letters, I finally decided to write a book purely for myself. A book that drew heavily on my own experiences and heritage. In other words, I wrote what I knew. I was born and grew up in London, but my parents were from the subcontinent. Almost 50 years ago, they moved to the UK. I didn't visit India until the age of 23, when I went there to work. Following 10 wonderful years there, I returned to England and have since written 2 series set in India. The first began with The Unexpected Inheritance of Inspector Chopra, an attempt to capture my incredible memories of the subcontinent. I was subsequently offered a 4-book deal for the series by Hodder and Stoughton. Later, I wrote Midnight at Malabar House, the first of a historical crime series set in 1950s Bombay, featuring India's first female police detective. Reflecting on the ingredients that went into these novels, the first thing that strikes me is that my heritage aligned perfectly with the books that I had written. That meant that issues of authenticity and possible cultural appropriation were instantly nullified. However, if one takes a closer look, you will see that my respective protagonists are not quite aligned with my own cultural identity. One is a Hindu, one a Parsi, yet I grew up in a Muslim household. In this respect, my affinity with the setting clearly helped. I lived in Mumbai for a decade and came to intimately know and understand the people that lived there. I spoke from a position of authority, and this allowed me to command a degree of trust with my agent, editor, and ultimately readers. This trust is an important and sometimes intangible component of the reasoning as to why some authors are given license to write about particular subjects, while others are quickly torn down for doing so. Sometimes this trust is earned. At other times it is conferred, because of the author's perceived personal knowledge or experience of the subject matter. Alexander McCall Smith is a great example of an author who has managed to write successfully about an ethnicity that is different from his own, earning the trust of millions of readers. McCall Smith is the creator of the #1 Ladies Detective Agency series, set in Botswana. The lead character of the series is Precious Ramotswe, a middle-aged African woman. Alexander McCall Smith, on the other hand, is a male, white Scotsman. McCall Smith's authority rests on the fact that he was born in Africa and at the age of 31 travelled to Botswana to set up and teach at the law school of the University of Botswana. His empathy for the country and its people is evident in his books. The lesson here is that in the matter of heritage, we shouldn't be bound by absolutes. Many of us have multiple tentacles of lineage winding around and through our DNA. Take my own example. Clearly, my ethnic heritage is from the subcontinent. I have mined that heritage to write books set in and about India. Yet I was born and grew up in England. Thus, being British is also part of my DNA. Does this then allow me to write stories set in Britain? Can I mine what I know about life in Britain? Here's where I think things get a little murkier. I know from past experience that for writers of colour it isn't so easy to write what they know when it comes to their British heritage. Such authors are often expected to write about their other heritage, the heritage of their parents and grandparents. If they are given license to tell stories about their British experience, they're steered towards immigrant tales. And although there are many wonderful and important books documenting those experiences, this also means that many stories that might be told never see the light of day, and minority writers often end up feeling a sense of frustration. In 2015, the Writing the Future report commissioned by Spread the Word found that the best chance of publication for a minority writer was via literary fiction dealing with such themes as racism, colonialism, or post-colonialism. The report's editor, Danuta Keane, states that a survey of authors found that minority writers feel pressurized into using cultural stereotypes. Others felt the reception for their work had been affected by the limited cultural awareness of their editors. One author stated, "I think there was some doubt among editors about the authenticity of my story. People in the UK simply didn't know about the community I had written about in the Caribbean." To address this problem, the report suggests that engaging more minority staff within the editorial and agenting professions would help address the misconception that a manuscript is not authentic when it reflects an aspect of a non-white culture unfamiliar to mainstream white editors. Ewan Thornycroft is an agent of almost 2 decades' experience. In recent years, he finds himself thinking more about issues such as voice and cultural appropriation. He doesn't believe an agent's job is to police writing, but rather to work out the best way to help an author to get published. And this can involve considering how an author's book will be portrayed in relation to the author's identity. If an author is writing characters outside their identity, Ewan will ask questions such as, is this a token use of such a character? Why does your story need this character? Have you done your homework? He believes that most people are guilty of unconscious bias, but he also believes that it is unfair to suggest that a middle-aged white man would not be able to appreciate a story about, say, a female Indian police officer. Having said this, he also believes that an authentic voice may, in many instances, be better placed to tell a particular story. This is certainly true, and nothing I have said so far should take away from authors who choose to write within their own lived experience. Over the past few years, we have seen examples of creative media where agency has been given to the storytellers to not only mine their own heritage, but for the resulting product to be sold as it stands, without the need for it to be filtered through a white lens. In 2019, the novel Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams won Best Book at the British Book of the Year Awards. Queenie is the story of a young London-based black woman whose turbulent love life hides darker secrets. Queenie is a book that could only have been written by a young black woman of Queenie's generation. The book does touch lightly on race and mildly critiques the way white people perceive the issue. Far from turning off white readers, they have embraced the book. Children's fiction has a particularly poor track record in terms of diverse characters. Back in 2017, an Arts Council study found that only 4% of children's books published in the UK that year featured black or ethnic minority characters. But this too is changing. And some of that change stems from minority authors mining their heritage to bring new stories to the industry. In 2018, Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi was published, the first in a young adult fantasy trilogy featuring an all-African cast. and set in a fictional world that represents traditional West African folklore. Adeyemi, a Nigerian American, mined her Yoruban heritage for the book. She received one of the biggest ever YA publishing deals, and the book was a subsequent hit. These examples are, admittedly, few and far between, but collectively they point to a fundamental shift. Consumers are increasingly indifferent to the ethnicity of either the protagonists or the authors of fiction. If a story is well told, they will part with their hard-earned cash. Writing what you know within this context clearly gives something of an advantage to those who share the heritage they are writing about. So if you, as an author, find yourself in that position, there is a clear case for you to mind that experience. In the next video, I'll take a look at cultural appropriation in literature that has met with a positive reception. If you found this video useful, feel free to alert others to this project and to download the written guide that accompanies the series from my website. I would also be extremely grateful if you could spend just 3 minutes filling out the short feedback survey available on my website at vaseemkhan.com, where you will also find further resources.